You're listening to the _Transformation podcast, your practical guide to business transformation.
Welcome to the _Transformation podcast. My name's Jason West.
And I'm Joe Ailes.
And together we're the founders of _. This week we're talking about building your support model. So if your transformation doesn't include replacing or significantly updating technology, you can probably skip past this section. Well, you can if you're completely satisfied with how your current system works and you don't need to make any changes, and you probably don't need to make any changes in the future. But if you think you may, then it's probably worth having a listen to the rest of this podcast. So establishing a robust technology support model is something that gets overlooked in a surprising number of transformation programs. In the heat of program delivery, attention naturally focuses on managing the latest integration risk, the design issues, or particularly challenging stakeholders. And yet, your ability to deliver the business benefits promised by your business case rests on how effectively you construct your support model. So how can a support model really be that important to the success of your program?
Well, it is really important. It's the piece of the jigsaw that's going to create sustainability among of the change.
Yeah.
An awful lot of, and we talked about this last time in terms of the resource in the last episode, the resources needed to execute the project well. All that capability and all that knowledge will walk out of the door, possibly at the end of a warranty phase, which typically is month 1, month 2, post go live of your technology. And if you don't have the right team to configure, change, adjust, optimize those design decisions or the configuration of the technology, you're going to struggle.
How much change is there realistically going to be, do you think, post go live?
Post go live, yeah. Day one, you're making changes. In hindsight is a wonderful thing, but you make a set of design decisions at the very beginning of a project on a technology platform that you don't really understand. And you probably won't really understand the impact of the design decisions on that particular technology until you've gone live in some cases. Sometimes you do find out if you've got really effective testing, and this is again one of the key episodes in our series 2, which is testing. If you've not been able to identify certain sort of nuances or suboptimal design decisions, in testing, you will surely find them out in operation. And then if you don't have the right team structure in place, well, it's two things, a number of things, but two things: the capability of the team to be able to actually diagnose, understand the issue, and really come up with a set of options that they can configure themselves or potentially outsource to a application management support organization to configure against the requirements that you've specified as your support that comes from the internal team. So that's one point. And the second point is actually the change control. Having effective change control mechanisms in place that are not going to unwind an awful lot of the decisions that you've made during the design for good reasons because you're making a knee-jerk reaction about something that doesn't happen. So support model at the very beginning of the project is key, because the individuals that are going to support the product need to be involved in the design decisions from the very outset.
Yes.
Well, again, we've seen it. We've had examples before where the support model team pick up a beast of a bit of technology that I've now got to manage, and the business starts to experience what this beast is like in the real world, and asks key questions. Why have we designed it that way?
Yeah.
And the support team don't know because they weren't involved in the original design decisions. They've just got landed with supporting it.
Yes.
And naturally, the business asks these difficult questions post go live, and the support team will typically go, that's a good point. Maybe we'll change it.
Yes, yeah.
And what they're doing, they're changing a fundamental design decision that's been agreed in principle at the very, very beginning of the project. That's to the detriment of the business case that was set out when the decision to transform was made. So you need to think about support model from day one.
Absolutely. Because, we've talked about, sort of the product meeting reality and the business demanding changes to be made, and some of those with good reason. But the other thing, unless you're incredibly lucky or you've planned it this way, you're not going to be going live with the full set of functionality of your brand new ERP or HCM system on day one. It's so unusual for that to happen because these are big, complex bits of technology. So day one, you're going to have a roadmap. There is functionality that you couldn't switch on day one because you didn't have the resource, or maybe you need to do, roll it out in a few phases. There's often good reasons for that.
Yeah, sometimes it's too much of a change to hit the business all at once.
Yeah,
so it's normal to have different phases of a program.
Yeah. And there's a difference between a follow-on phase where you've got a product that's live with users, with data, with changes happening on a daily basis, with people transacting in the system, versus your very first fresh greenfield build of the phase one. So regardless, the support team's involved in that. But, the reality being that, you could have a 2-year, a 3-year roadmap to roll out all the different functionality to all the geographies, to all the business units. And unless you've got a huge program budget and you can afford to have a program team in place for 2-3 years, it's actually a support team that are going to be the people that will do the work and make the changes happen. So, that demand from the roadmap is one aspect. You've got those business as usual changes, and all this time they're having to support this product in production. But you've also got the fact that, assuming that you've selected a cloud product, it's going to update. It's going to update 2, 3, 4 times a year. And all those changes need to be understood. You've got to do regression testing. You've got to make sure that, you're not relying on some functionality that's about to get retired or that your integrations keep working. So, there's constant work to be done. And I think that's one of the things that organizations often don't quite understand until they've gone live with these new software as a service products is you've just bought into this strategy of continuous improvement, that your core systems will just update on a regular basis, whether you want them to or not. So you need to be ready to analyze that change, to make the most of it, to adopt it, to make sure it doesn't damage anything in your business. So
because it's very different to the old world of on-prem, isn't it? Where upgrades were painful, but took place in a controlled way at the point where the organization was ready to do that upgrade. And very often organizations just decided to not upgrade to the latest version of the Oracle ERP because it's too painful, and they ended up finding themselves 2 or 3 versions behind the current version. Cloud, the Workdays of this world don't let you do that. So you have to be ready. You have to have the skills internally to have foresight about what's coming down the line. They need to work with the process owners to help the process owners drive innovation through the technology. Right? Because it's the support model is there as they're the technical experts of the product. They're there to make sure that the product doesn't go down. The product is sustainable, is robust. They're the gatekeepers of the system. The process owners are the ones that are driving innovation through their function.
Yeah. And
the two of them should work hand in hand. In many of the projects that we've sort of come across, when we typically ask the question of those program directors and project sponsors, so you're in mid-flight of a system implementation. So where are you with your support model? and many times they've not even thought about it.
No, absolutely.
Well, you're running a real risk here. Because you don't understand what you need and you haven't factored that in. Is it even in your business case? That's one of the things that is often excluded from the business case. There's this idea that because it's cloud, it doesn't need support.
Yes.
It's like the Facebook. Nobody supports Facebook. Nobody supports LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Well, LinkedIn have got a massive team themselves developing the product, and so have Facebook. So there's this idea that the products are self-maintained. They update themselves every 6 months. Why would I don't need anybody here supporting it? So it's so wrong. So there is this sort of perception that, these things are self-maintained and we need minimal teams. But actually, in many cases, your support team will increase as a result of you implementing technology. Mm-hmm. Because especially if you're going from a legacy to a new cloud-based system with rich in functionality in terms of reporting, security, different modules, or mobile-enabled and all these great things that will transform your business, no question about it. You go into that from something that's probably a structured database, on-prem,
with limited changed in the past 10 years,
with limited functionality. That hasn't changed in the past 10 years. It's a data repository at best for some organizations. That type of system requires minimal support. Right? So when you're going into a full-fledged sort of human capital management system or finance management system with an array of functionality, if you don't put a support model in place to effectively support all of that going forward.
Hopefully that describes why this is important to think about this now, and the fact that you really do need to put this front of mind as you're getting started with your implementation. But how do you actually go about building that technical capability in-house? What are the different ways that we can go about that?
First and foremost, you have to hire a team. You have to build it. And the best time to do it is right up front. Yes. You have to do it at the start of the program. We've seen situations where organizations don't think about support model until way down the line.
Yeah.
And it's the wrong place to think about it.
Yeah, normally just before they're about to go live. And they suddenly go, oh crikey, who's going to support this?
Somebody needs to be supporting this post go live. It's the wrong thing to do. You have to involve those individuals that are ultimately going to support the product at the beginning of your design. So they need to be, hire the team at the same time as the project team. Start perhaps with, if you don't have a support team in place, start with the person that's ultimately going to be accountable for supporting it, the manager, the head of.
Yes.
Bring that person on board. If you then need to start thinking of additional resources that are going to support different functional areas of the system, bring them on board too at that point. They're going to involve them in the design workshops so that they understand the rationale for decisions that have been made, and they ultimately then understand why the system has been configured in a way in which the system has been configured. So that's really important to sort of give them the context.
Yes.
A second part is involve them in the configuration of the product.
Yeah. Not all system integrators like this, do they?
They don't, and they don't like it because for good reasons, actually, because they fear that they lose control of the configuration, because ultimately they're accountable for delivering the quality product.
Yeah,
and if if they fear that there are individuals on a client side that are meddling in configuration, they're clearly going to get nervous about it.
Yes.
So you have to establish that partnership model during the contract negotiations.
Yeah, so during scoping.
You have to agree upfront what's the relationship going to look like and how it's going to function when you're in implementation, so that there are no surprises.
Yeah, and it's likely you're going to have to agree to some prerequisites around the type of the individuals that will have access. So they will need to have gone through a certain amount of training on the product, for example, or have some level of certification if that's available for the technology you're implementing.
Yeah. And it might be that obviously cloud technology is developed through various iterations and various prototypes. And maybe it's not prototype 1, maybe it's prototype 2 that they get involved with. Because clearly prototype 1 is a black box until it's presented back to the client first time round. But maybe through the various iterations, the support team can get plugged into some of the configuration and actually execute some of it under the control of the partner, providing they've got the skills to do it.
Yes,
or maybe even do it in an implementation tenant, test it, get the partner, the systems integrator or the implementation partner to QA it, validate it before it's moved into production. Into the implementation tenant. But if those individuals are engaged in the configuration of the product really early on, come go live, they've got the skills they need to make those configuration changes day one.
Yes.
Yeah. And everyone, there isn't one single product, one single project that goes live where everything is perfect.
Yeah.
Within the first sort of 2 to 3 weeks, issues will start to appear where some of the design decisions might need to be reviewed. And if you've got the team in place able to execute some of those changes, the transformation is going to gain traction a lot sooner.
And it's critical to realizing the investment that you've made in this new technology. You need to be able to change it and develop it over time. So now I know you are desperate to talk about structure.
I am desperate to talk about structure, yes.
So let's just step through this one in a structured way.
In a structured way, yeah.
So we'll talk about kind of 4 elements of a support model. So we'll talk about support. We'll talk about development, design, and control. So if we start off on the support side, what are the bare bones that you need to support, and what are the sorts of activities that your support team will be doing when it comes to support?
Yeah, so when you're implementing a structure, you need to think of what type of support is needed for different stakeholders, for instance. So typically we tend to see a tiered approach to a support model.
Yeah.
So a tier 1 is almost an inquiry type of service where the users are struggling with a particular piece of the process or the technology, and pick up the phone and talk to somebody. So that tends to be your first line of support. So these are a bunch of super users that might sometimes sit in a shared services organization in a contact center. They obviously need to become experts in a system to be able to guide the user through the process or help them troubleshoot why some things are not working according to plan from an end user perspective.
Yes.
So that's your typical sort of tier 1. If the problem is more related to configuration or a system issue, that's a tier 2 model. And this is the tier 2 is where you'd see in-house, where we would recommend having in-house capability to troubleshoot and diagnose some of those configuration issues.
Yeah, and fix
fix, absolutely, absolutely, and fix. And if you've involved those individuals way up front in the project, they're going to have the skills and capability to do that.
Yeah.
So it might be a business process issue, it might be a reporting issue, a security issue that they can quickly diagnose and understand what the fix might be.
Yeah.
You're listening to the Transformation podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the transformation capability specialists. To find out more, visit _group.com.
And then there's the tier 3, which is, these are the things that are slightly more complex. It might be, I've got an issue with an integration, for instance, or I've got an issue with a configuration within the system that I can't address myself. My support model team doesn't have the capability to do so.
Yeah.
In which case, absolutely have a third-party AMS or application management support structure that gives you that additional sort of capability and systems expertise that will configure that particular change for you.
Yes.
So that's how you'd typically build a model. What you don't do is when we've seen some cases in the past where everything is done is outsourced to an AMS, application management system.
Yeah, because the team doesn't have the capability.
Exactly.
So you have a tier 1, which then immediately jumps to tier 3.
Tier 3. And what it means is you spend an awful lot of time and cash, frankly, triaging issues that should be easily resolved.
Yeah.
And that's not what the AMS service is there to deliver. The AMS service's purpose is to give enhanced system configuration capability to the client.
Yes, In the short term, from a commercial perspective, the AMS provider might go, great, this is a massive contract. We're getting hundreds of thousands a year, and I'm just triaging issues that really the client should be answering. But actually, what tends to happen is the relationship breaks down because the client gets upset. They're spending hundreds of thousands a year, and they're not really seeing the value for it. So it's a bit of a short-term view. If you imagine that kind of pyramid of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, you ideally you want to be going live with as a thicker band of tier 2 in your triangle as possible, and you want to see that growing over time, and you want to see your tier 3 shrinking over time. That's kind of the key aim there. Really try and resolve as much as you can in-house as possible. And as your team get up to speed, they're going to be more capable, and you'll be able to achieve that more and more.
Yeah, that's right. And use tier 3 in the right way. So when you're developing your support contract for AMS, you've really got to think through, okay, what are the components or what are the elements of service I want, and be specific, be clear about that. So integration support, troubleshooting integrations, because that's something quite sort of specific with some of the technologies that, unless the organization's enormous, where you've got hundreds of integrations, then build capability in-house to do that yourself. Yeah. But if you've got a handful of integrations, which in many cases, most programs, that's where you end up with, having that integration expertise in your support model might not be appropriate.
Yes.
That's important. Another area, another key element to include in AMS is impact assessment of future changes.
Yes.
These products tend to change every 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
These organizations have got a better understanding, I guess, of the impact of that change on the configuration of the client's system than sometimes the clients do. So getting that built into the support model is important.
Yeah, and they get early sight of the releases and training from the vendors and all that sort of stuff. It's really valuable getting their input, absolutely. Yeah. So that's kind of the support side, and that's table stakes, really. Yeah. That's just supporting the steady state with nothing changing. But as you've already alluded to, the product updates, and we've already talked about all the different sources of demand that are going to come in to make changes to the system. I think a tiered model for development is a good way of thinking about your development side as well. So is it 3 tiers? Is it the same as on the support side, or?
Probably. Because you've got it's based on the complexity of change, isn't it? So you want to have maybe simple changes done by super user community. I want to change someone's security role, or I want to create a new report, or some things they're simple can be done by a tier 1 development team. Things that are slightly more complicated, that may be linked to roadmap items. The process owner is starting to have conversations with the support team around how do I enhance the capabilities of the product?
Adding new processes.
New processes, new features.
Yeah.
That probably requires a bit more of a project approach to it, and more around sort of release management, because you've got comms, you've got training, you've got all of these things to think about as you're releasing new features. So that's probably a tier 2, still using the internal team. And then you've got a tier 3, which is right. There's a new module that we want to implement.
Yeah, or the change is going to ripple through our entire system architecture.
So we are going to now have to contract maybe a systems integrator or a partner, or leverage the AMS contract that we've got, but in a different way. I think it depends on a complexity of changes. I think you should structure your development accordingly, and think through. Don't just think through about how you deploy change and system change across your business as well. Some fixes in tier 1, do them quickly, no problem. Tier 2, you really need to think about in terms of how do you communicate, how do you engage the organization in the change that you're about to impose on it. And tier 3, gosh, it's a proper project.
Yeah, you need a project manager.
You need to
manage the change.
You might be, might even have to put in a design authority or a project board or an exec steerco around it. So you think through. There's tiered support on running the show, and then tiered support on development as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got our development, but that's the technical development side. There needs to be design that happens. So we've talked about process owners, we've talked about design authority, and this is really where that enduring capability around design comes in. I think in the previous world of on-prem, there's so much technical complexity to these products. You've got to think about hardware and servers and network cables and routers, and then you've got to think about databases and middleware, and before you even get to the software, you've got this massive stack of technology. So in the past, a lot of that design capability sat in the IT function because it was really deep technical design. With the world shifting to cloud, the amount of technical design is actually significantly smaller. The technical footprint of these products is so much smaller, a tenth of a cloud product. So there's an interesting conversation to be had about where does design best sit now? Because the technical limitations, you don't have to think about databases and hardware and all that sort of stuff. There's that decision really about where on the continuum of taking a business requirement, turning it into a functional requirement, turning it into a technical requirement, and then designing something. In the past, that it was very much sat in that technical box. Now, I think there's a real argument to say, well, that design capability should shift more into the functional space. But that's an area we see some challenge.
Yes, pros and cons for both, right?
Yeah.
What's interesting is in the IT world, these functions have been delivering this for years. They've got so much expertise and know-how. In configuration. They've got all the good habits, good configuration control, good documentation, good test management, good release management.
Yes.
They've been doing this for years. You've now put this responsibility of not so much of the doing, but the thought process around configuration.
It's the control
management and the control in the hands of an individual that doesn't have that expertise, doesn't have that background.
Yes.
So it's really difficult to sort of there's pros and cons for keeping the model in IT or not keeping the model in IT and releasing it to the functions.
Yeah.
But there's and there's just a risk factor really. So if you have it in a function, the IT function should impose the controls it uses today to manage any form of configuration change, or change control, and using the processes that organization uses, so ITIL for instance, and imposing that process onto the function. It's and making sure that the right things, the good practices that are developed through ITIL in all these years are embedded in a support model of that technology that's being deployed.
It's interesting because what you're talking about there is control. It's all the control and governance processes around it, and I think there's good argument that potentially that rests in IT.
Yeah,
because they've got the experience, they've got the track record, they've got the accreditations that have been built up over years, as you say. But I think design is separate to that. So the design thinking piece around what is the right solution design here. Not talking about how it gets released out into production.
Yeah.
This is more about, okay, I've understood the business requirements. I now need to design solutions in the system and in process to deliver the outcomes that the business needs. Because what we've seen in the past with some of these kind of on-premise models is you get into this difficult relationship between a function and the IT organization, where it becomes a transactional relationship, which is this kind of, you give me your requirements and I'll come up with a technical solution. And that the two worlds don't really kind of translate particularly well.
That's right, yeah.
So where it's worked is it's far more a co-design with IT and the function working together.
Absolutely.
What happened in some organizations is they carved that out and they said, okay, we're now going to create systems accountants or HRAS teams, and they're going to report into the function rather than report into the IT organization. There is no right or wrong answer with this, but it's a conversation you need to have now.
Yes, up front, right at the beginning.
And be really mindful of the reasons why the support model is the way it is today.
Yeah.
And you're talking about moving accountability potentially at the executive level. So there's a good chance you could get flattened as somebody sat within one of those organizations if you don't approach it in the right way. So be really mindful of the politics and the power dynamics, and tread very, very carefully as you work through designing this operating or this support model. And you need to address this as part of your wider target operating model design, and you've got to involve the IT function. You need senior people from the IT function involved in those workshops.
No question, because ultimately your system that you're implementing won't work in isolation.
Yeah.
So it'll have to be plugged into other enterprise-wide systems.
Yeah.
If the transformation that you're trying to deliver, it's rare that any sort of system implementation will operate as a standalone system, because you just won't achieve the transformational objectives that you're setting out to achieve. So the IT function is vital. Their involvement is vital in the project throughout.
Yeah.
What become, again, horses for courses, because if it's a pure standalone system implementation or transformation in a function, some of that capability could well sit in a function governed by IT processes and so on, with the design thinking happening at a functional level. What becomes really interesting is where you implement a multifunctional transformation. So if you're implementing an enterprise-wide system that has, the technology spans beyond just one function. So you might have a system implementation, a transformation around business services, for instance, business services transformation, where I'm transforming finance, procurement, HR at the same time and implementing an enterprise-wide system that covers all functional areas. The support model for that type of system is really complicated and will require huge amounts of thought, because all of a sudden you've got three functions setting out what they wish to do, what's their roadmap. You've got an IS function or something in a center that's trying to manage all of that demand with the finite resources it has.
Yes.
Because one of the key things we stress is the need for process owners to drive innovation through business processes or the technology that we're implementing. So the process owners need to take accountability. And you're absolutely right, because years gone by, it would have been the IT function approaching the operations, describing to the operations the value you can unlock from the system is X, but you're not leveraging it.
Yes, yeah.
Right? So, how can we get more value from this ERP that we've implemented 5 years ago? We need to switch it, turn it on its head. We need to say, right, the IT function are delivering system solutions against requirements from the function, from the process owners. So when you have a multifunctional system, really need to start thinking about, okay, how are we going to control, not control, but how are we going to gatekeep what the requirements, the demand, how are we going to manage all of that? And who's going to provide your tier one support in that case?
Yes.
So I've got a question, I've got a query with my expenses or my purchasing or my account. Who do I contact? I've got a query with my personal information. It all sits in the same system. But who do I speak to? So all of a sudden, do I speak to finance for troubleshooting, or do I speak to HR for troubleshooting? Do I speak to a central team? So think through, if it's a multifunctional system implementation, think through what's that support going to look like for the end user.
Yeah. So hopefully we've put forward an argument that failing to put enough time and resource into designing this kind of future support model is going to add quite a significant amount of risk into you delivering the transformation that you seek. So if you don't have the skills in-house or the capacity in-house to actually design and implement an effective support model, then please contact us.
Yes.
It's something we are deeply passionate about, and it's something that we'd be more than happy to help with, but it's really critical to your ongoing success. So if for no other reason, hopefully this has just really scratched the surface, to be honest, of what is a really big topic, but it's something that's well worth your time and attention, because it will pay dividends as you kind of roll into operations to have that really effective support model. So that was episode 2. Next week, we're looking at how you build engagement through your transformation. So complete change of pace. We're looking at change management and how you get the business involved in delivering your transformation. To download a copy of the Build or Scoping Transformation Checklist, please visit _group.com and click on White Papers under the Insights section of the website.